Some fears don't scream, they whisper, and that's precisely why they're so hard to notice. They seep in slowly, like a fine mist that covers the soul's clarity. They show up when you hesitate before accepting an invitation, when the desire to create something new arises, but you pull back, when the urge to change knocks on your door, but your body responds with tension. Maybe you can't quite name what you're feeling today, but somewhere inside there's a sensation that something is always about to go wrong, like a silent alarm that never stops ringing. That alarm is fear. And what if I told you that this fear that seems to paralyze you actually holds a raw energy, a primal force, powerful but still unrefined? Napoleon Hill once said, "Fear is just faith reversed." And as cryptic as this might sound at first, it holds a profound spiritual and neurological truth. Because fear and faith come from the same place, your emotional imagination. Both use your energy to create inner scenarios. Both operate in the invisible before they manifest in the visible. The difference lies in direction. While faith constructs elevating images, fear distorts those images and uses them against you. Joe Dispenza teaches that the brain, when fed the same thoughts repeatedly, creates real physical structures. We call this neuroplasticity. And when those thoughts are soaked in fear, the body begins to live in constant alert, as if always on the brink of a threat. It becomes a cycle. Thought activates fear, fear reinforces thought, and the body learns to live in war, even in times of peace. Over time, you stop responding to life and start reacting to ghosts. But here's the shift. Fear, uncomfortable as it is not your enemy. It's an outdated protection system, a survival software that needs to be rewritten. You don't need to fight it. You just need to understand what it's trying to tell you. Instead of running, listen. Instead of denying, embrace. Fear is not the end. It's the beginning of something that's asking for transformation. So today, maybe for the first time in a long while, allow yourself to consider this possibility. What if the fear you feel is, in fact, a misunderstood spiritual compass? What if it's trying to show you the way, not block it? What if it's the echo of a part of you that's longing to evolve, but hasn't yet found the courage to reveal itself? Fear might be your greatest adversary or your greatest ally. It all depends on how you choose to hear it. Not all fear is current. Many of the feelings that tighten your chest today, that paralyze your decisions, that sabotage your relationships, are echoes, ancient echoes, from moments that have already passed, but left deep imprints. They're emotional memories crystallized in your body, still vibrating as if everything is happening again. Fear, more often than not, isn't about what's in front of you. It's about what your mind has learned to expect from life. It learned that love is risky, that trying hurts, that trusting is dangerous, and these beliefs, even when silent, still shape much of your life. Napoleon Hill, with timeless insight, spoke of the 6 basic fears: fear of poverty, criticism, ill health, loss of love, old age, and death. Not as moral failures, but as inherited mental viruses, like invisible programs running without our awareness. You may have never named these fears, but they show up subtly, in the fear of being seen, in the shame of making mistakes, in the anxiety of not being accepted, in the sense that something bad is always about to happen. Spiritual neuroscience reveals a profound truth. The emotional brain does not distinguish past from present. When triggered by a word, a look, a situation, it relives old pain as if it's happening now. And your body responds with the same reactions: tension, escape, shutdown, sabotage. Not because you're weak, but because there's a familiar emotional pattern trying to repeat itself. And perhaps this is the most sensitive part of the journey, realizing that much of what you call reality is in truth repetition. Repetition of unprocessed experiences, of unacknowledged feelings, of stories longing for a new ending. Because the deep desire within you, the one you may not have spoken aloud yet, is to be free. Free from the loops, free from the feeling of running in circles, free from trying to change everything on the outside while still feeling stuck on the inside. You know it's time. Time to stop reacting with yesterday's fears. Time to rewrite your responses. Time, above all, to see that the fear still leading you is only trying to protect a version of yourself that no longer needs to be in control. Sometimes fear doesn't show up as panic. It shows up as logic, with convincing arguments, with carefully crafted justifications. It speaks in the voice of reason, but it carries the weight of insecurity. You think you're being prudent, cautious, realistic, but in truth you're just rationalizing an unhealed fear. And this kind of fear is even more dangerous because it seems wise. It seems wise to delay that project, wise to keep your distance, wise not to try again. But beneath this apparent wisdom, what's really vibrating is past pain. Humans are masters of self-protection, and in the name of that protection, we've learned to cloak fear in reason. We say, now's not the right time, when deep down we feel we'll never be ready. We say, better not risk it when the heart is aching to move. We say, I'm just being logical, when the soul is begging for courage. This is the trap of elegant fear. The fear that wears a suit, behaves well, but paralyzes just the same. Napoleon Hill saw it clearly when he said that an untrained mind is like a racing car with the handbrake on. You may have power, talent, ideas, desire, but if the invisible handbrake of fear is engaged, nothing will move. And often that brake hides in what seems most trustworthy: analytical thinking, the logical mind that calculates risks but forgets to include intuition in the equation. This is where life begins to stall, when we confuse fear with maturity, when we label old patterns as good sense. When fear presents itself as the voice of reason, it convinces us to stay in comfort zones that no longer nourish us. And the subtlest part? It makes us feel in control when in truth we're just avoiding the unknown. This reflection might be uncomfortable, it might stir resistance, but it also opens space for an essential question. What in your life have you been calling prudence, but is actually fear in disguise? What have you postponed behind convincing reasons? What have you not yet allowed to bloom, out of fear of losing what's familiar, even if it no longer serves you? Maybe by recognizing this self-deception, something begins to shift, because the first step isn't blind action, it's clarity, seeing fear where it truly lives, understanding how it operates, and above all realizing it doesn't have to lead you anymore. Your mind can remain logical, but it no longer needs to be ruled by fear dressed as reason. There's a widespread and deeply misleading belief that fear must be conquered, that it should be eliminated through willpower, as if it were an enemy to be defeated in an inner war. But what almost no one tells you is that trying to overcome fear through force often creates an even deeper conflict. Because fear, when confronted directly and aggressively, doesn't go away, it hides, it adapts, it finds new ways to surface and becomes even more resilient. The subconscious mind, where fear lives, doesn't respond well to aggression. It rejects commands that sound threatening. So each time you try to get rid of fear, your body tightens, resistance grows, self-sabotage intensifies, anxiety disguises itself as urgency, and fear returns stronger because now it's not just afraid of the world out there, it's also afraid of the inner war you've started. There is another path, a quieter path, a gentler but far more powerful one, a way that doesn't require you to fight fear, but to listen to it with spiritual maturity. Fear isn't there by accident. It serves a function. It's trying to protect you, maybe from rejection you felt before, from a failure that left its mark, from a pain you haven't yet learned to hold. And when you ask your fear, "What are you trying to protect me from losing?" something shifts, something opens, because instead of confrontation, you offer presence. Florence Scovel Shinn once said, "Fear is faith contaminated, a distorted form of faith placed in the worst-case scenario." And that's exactly what happens. You're still using your mind's creative power, but directing it towards scarcity, loss, and limitation. When in truth, that same power can be redirected. Fear's energy doesn't need to be erased, it needs to be purified, reframed, transformed into a sign that something new is approaching. Maybe the fear you feel today isn't an obstacle. Maybe it's a signal that you're nearing the edge of what's familiar, that you're about to cross a line that once felt unreachable. And that's why it screams, because your entire inner system has learned to stay safe in the old. But your soul wants to grow. And growing hurts. Growing is scary. Growing demands that you feel fear, but not surrender to it. You don't need to be a hero. You don't need to be fearless. You just need to understand that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is a spiritual decision, a silent commitment to your own expansion. And that begins not when you try to defeat fear, but when you choose to listen to it. and move anyway. Sometimes the most profound transformation happens quietly. It's not dramatic. It doesn't require complex rituals. It doesn't come with quick promises. It starts with a simple act, pausing, breathing, and looking within, honestly. Fear, no matter how intense, is just a frequency, a vibration that can be altered. And when your body and mind enter into coherence, that frequency changes, not through force, but through reconnection. Reconnection with the intention that vibrates higher than fear. The intention that remembers who you are and what you truly long to create. The first step is subtle but essential. Breathing and naming, conscious breathing, feeling the air entering, and as you exhale, allowing fear to rise without judgment, without needing to push it away, without needing to hide it, just recognizing it. And then, with your inner voice, naming it. Fear of failing, fear of not being loved, fear of loss. Naming fear is like turning on the light in a dark room. It stops being a vague monster and starts having form, a form that can be transformed. The second step is where creative imagination becomes a vibrational bridge. Visualize, not as escapism, but as emotional reprogramming, the opposite of the fear already realized. If fear says I'll fail, visualize yourself succeeding with ease. If fear says I'll be rejected, see yourself welcomed, loved, belonging. That image must be felt. It must create warmth in your chest. It must feel real to your body, not just your mind. Because the body believes what the mind emotionally repeats. Joe Dispenza reminds us of this. Emotional repetition creates a new energetic signature, and that signature begins to reshape your reality. The third step is verbal, but not just a phrase, it's a vibrational choice. The affirmation, I give new meaning to my fear. It is now energy in service of my expansion. When spoken with presence, this phrase isn't magic, it's a code. A gentle command that tells the subconscious, it's safe to end the old cycle, and something new can begin. These three steps, breathing, visualization, affirmation, aren't formulas, they're keys. Small keys that, when used consistently, begin to unlock parts of you that have been closed for years. Places where fear no longer needs to rule the house, where elevated intention can finally come in, quietly, steadily, lovingly, like a memory of what was always there, waiting to be reawakened. There's a form of fear that doesn't show up as panic or paralysis. It manifests quietly, disguised as good intentions. It's the fear that hides in the urge to control everything, to predict every step, to guarantee every outcome, to avoid any surprise. This fear doesn't scream, it plans, it organizes, it monitors. But behind all this vigilance, what truly vibrates is a deep mistrust in life. A feeling that if you're not always in charge, everything might fall apart. As if the universe were chaos that must be contained, and you alone are responsible for keeping everything in place. The need to control is often a desperate attempt to keep pain at bay, because if everything is under control, nothing can hurt you, nothing will go wrong, nothing will catch you off guard. But the truth is, this attempt at total control is not only exhausting, it's an illusion. Life doesn't fit in maps. Flow doesn't obey rigidity. And the more you try to control, the more you vibrate in scarcity, threat, and fear. Because behind the control lies the belief that you're alone, that you must hold everything yourself, that trust is too dangerous. This vibration creates density, a field where manifestation becomes difficult, where creativity is blocked, where possibility shrinks. The quantum field, this subtle space where reality and intention merge, responds to your frequency. And when that frequency is saturated with control, there's no space for the new. The new requires openness. The new requires trust. The new requires presence. And the fear of losing control prevents all of that. But here's something that changes everything. Fear doesn't need to be eliminated. It doesn't have to vanish for you to trust. It can still be present, and yet you can choose to let go. To surrender, not to passivity, but to the awareness that there is a greater intelligence operating with you, not against you. Practical spirituality teaches us that trust isn't the absence of vigilance. It's presence with surrender. It's knowing there is a timing that isn't yours, an order you can't see, a care you don't control, but that is always at work when you allow it. When you begin to accept that control is merely armor, Heavy, rigid, but understandable, something begins to open. You realize that what you called protection was really a prison, that what seemed like security was actually repetition, and that the freedom you've been longing for might begin the moment you take a deep breath and release what was never truly yours to hold. Fear might still visit, but it no longer needs to guide your steps. Throughout the ages, in nearly every spiritual and mythological tradition, one image repeats itself: the dragon guarding a treasure. A fierce guardian, shrouded in fire, protecting something sacred: the gold, the pearl, the source. The symbol is ancient, but its message remains alive. The dragon is fear, and the treasure it guards is your power. Not the power that dominates others, but the power that transforms you, that awakens forgotten parts, that activates ancestral memories of courage, faith, and expansion. What you fear the most is likely where your soul most longs to grow, and that's why fear shows up so intensely. Not as punishment, but as a sign, a signal that you're nearing something big, something that could change how you see yourself. Fear, in this view, is an initiator. It's not the end of the road, it's the guardian of the portal. Napoleon Hill understood this when he said, "Every adversity carries with it the seed of an equivalent benefit." The dragon may look like an enemy, but it carries within it the key to your inner gold. That key, however, only reveals itself when you approach with presence. When instead of running you choose to look, when instead of resisting you choose to listen. Because fear has its own language. It speaks in sensations, in mental images, in body memories. And when you begin to decode that language, you discover that what once seemed threatening was just a call for attention, a call to something greater. Often, the moment when fear shows up most intensely is the exact moment an old version of you is about to die, and something new wants to be born. It's as if your old self is screaming to survive, while your new self is only whispering. Fear arises at the threshold. It's not there to block you, it's there to test you. And the test isn't about strength, it's about truth, about vibrational integrity, about aligning what you feel, think, and do. The dragon doesn't disappear, but you change. And when you change, your relationship with it changes too. It stops being a terror and becomes a teacher. A guardian who once felt like a threat, but who was always there to lead you back to what's rightfully yours: your courage, your faith, your power. Fear, when understood, is not an ending. It's the beginning of a new life. A life where the treasure isn't what you conquer outside, but what awakens within. Transformation doesn't always look dramatic. It doesn't come with fanfare. Sometimes it's so subtle you almost miss it, but suddenly you realize something has shifted. The fear is still there, yes, it still visits, it still whispers, but it no longer holds the same weight. It no longer makes your decisions. It no longer sets the pace of your steps. You begin to sense that courage isn't a roar, it's a quiet presence, a steadiness that rises from within, a decision to continue even while trembling. Most people think that the absence of fear is the sign they've healed, but the truth is different. The real sign of transformation isn't that fear vanishes, it's that your response to it changes. Before, fear made you stop. Now it simply walks beside you. Before, it froze you. Now it passes through. You begin to understand that courage isn't about defeating fear. It's about coexisting with it, feeling the flutter in your stomach but moving anyway, hearing the inner noise but acting with intention. These signs are delicate. Sometimes it's just that moment when you say yes, even with shaky hands, or when you open your heart, even with your voice trembling, or when you realize you don't need to explain yourself so much anymore, that you no longer need to please to feel accepted, that you can exist in your wholeness with fear, with doubt, with imperfection, and still move forward. That's courage, not the kind you read about in stories, the kind that's quiet, lived, sacred. The coherence between heart and action begins to take root, not as a one-time act, but as a new state of being. You feel less at the mercy of the old patterns. Your choices carry less of the past's weight. Your presence feels less fragmented. And here lies the real victory over fear, in softness, in serenity, in the authenticity of being who you are, even when uncertainty still dances around you. The deepest spiritual wisdom teaches that true growth is quiet, that the greatest healings don't make noise. They show up in how you breathe, in the gentleness with which you handle your own flaws, in the compassion you extend to yourself. If you feel, even slightly, that something in you is no longer the same, then you're changing. And that change, invisible to the world, is a vibrational miracle, a seed beginning to bloom, without hurry, without noise, but with truth. There comes a moment, almost imperceptible, when the energy of fear begins to shift direction. It still vibrates, it still exists, but it no longer pulls you down. It no longer binds you. It no longer clouds your way. On the contrary, it begins to show you something. It becomes a compass, a quiet ally, a signpost pointing to your next expansion. Napoleon Hill once said, "Fear is faith, reversed." And maybe now, at the end of this journey, those words finally make full sense. Because when you turn that key, when you reverse the direction of that energy again, what once felt like a prison becomes a portal. Fear transforms into living faith, focused and vibrant. Greg Braden reminds us that coherence between the mind and the heart is the true generator of quantum power. Thinking positively is not enough. You must feel truthfully. You must align your thoughts with your emotions, and both with your actions. Fear, in this process, is what most disrupts coherence. It fragments, it splits, it creates inner conflict. But when welcomed, it can also unify. It can be the beginning of reconnection, of restoring your trust in yourself, of remembering that there is a greater field, one of intelligence and love, that responds to your most authentic vibration. And when you choose to listen to fear, not as an enemy, but as a messenger, everything changes. The frequency changes. Perception shifts. Life begins to realign. Because fear, once the force blocking your expansion, becomes the ground beneath your feet as you grow. It doesn't disappear, but it is redefined. It becomes part of the path, not as a barrier, but as a signal, a reminder that you are alive, that you are feeling, that you are in motion. Perhaps the most symbolic truth of all is this: fear is the first guardian at the gate of spiritual freedom. It's not there to stop you. It's there to test you, to see if you are ready, ready to trust, ready to let go, ready to remember who you are, even when everything around you feels uncertain. Fear, when looked in the eye with compassion, reveals its true face, and you discover that behind it has always been your purest strength. The journey doesn't end here, but something does end. The idea that fear is a mistake. It isn't. It's part of the path, part of the soul, part of the passage. And now that you recognize it, maybe you can walk with it, no longer against it. And in that sacred, silent walk, fear stops being a prison and becomes a bridge to who you came here to be.